Hello everyone, my name is Anitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I've been working on a yellow deck and I definitely think it's a really powerful and really interesting deck that's doing stuff other than, just playing Shine Greymon. So going over the deck really quickly. So starting off with the Digitama, I'm running 4 copies of Upamon because Upamon has the nice inheritable ability of when attacking once per turn, if our security is 3 or less, then we get to draw a card. And drawing cards is really good, so that's why we want to play Upamon. And then as far as the last Digitama, I'm running 1 copy of Koromon, because Koromon has a really nice inheritable ability of his own, where when attacking once per turn, if our security is 3 or less, then one of our opponent's Digimon gets minus 1000 DP. So you could already start to see with our Digitama that we're trying to get to that 3 or less security threshold, so that way we could start triggering our abilities. So that's going to be a huge big core concept of the deck, is trying to get to that 3 threshold, and you could play around with the ratios on these Digitama, but these are the 2 Digitama that you really want to be using because they just synergize very well with one another and the rest of the deck. Next, as far as our rookies go, I'm running 4 copies of Labramon. So Labramon is just a really good rookie to have because it has a very powerful inheritable ability, where during your turn, if your opponent's Digimon is destroyed because its DP was reduced to 0, then you get to draw 1 card. So a lot of our late game is trying to destroy the opponent's Digimon through DP reduction, so having a card just to benefit us from doing that type of strategy just is very good and very powerful, especially since we're drawing cards, and drawing cards is always good. Next, I'm running 1 copy of Lopmon. So Lopmon is a really interesting Digimon because she has a nice when played ability where we get to look at the top card of our security stack, and then if we add that card into our hand, then we get to draw 1 card. So this card's effectively drawing us 2 cards, 1 from our security stack and 1 from our deck, and as we know, drawing cards is really powerful, on top of which, again, she is reducing our security stack, so that way we could get to that magical 3 threshold that much quicker, and again, she's just doing it all while gaining us some additional cards for additional card advantage. So Lopmon is just a very powerful card for the deck. Next, I'm running 1 copy of Kudamon. So Kudamon is in here for a very similar reason to Lopmon, where it just helps us get to that 3 security threshold that much faster, but his on-play ability is a little bit different, in which we trash the top card of our security stack to reduce one of the opponent's Digimon's DP by 2000. So he's playing into the whole control aspect of the deck, where he's just reducing the DP, so that way we get to potentially delete the opponent's Digimon, and on top of which, again, he's reducing our security stack, so we hit that 3 threshold relatively easily. Next up, I'm running 4 copies of BushiAgumon. So BushiAgumon is a very powerful card for the deck because he has this haste ability, or rush ability, whatever it's actually going to get translated to. But basically, what this haste ability is doing is this Digimon can attack the turn it's played. This does not work with Digivolving, so you cannot Digivolve into him and attack right away unless the Digimon was already on the field. So haste only works when he is played, not when you Digivolve. Keep that in mind when using the card. But because he has this haste ability, we have a whole bunch of different ways to cheat him into play, on top of which, if the opponent just gives us a whole bunch of memory, we don't really feel bad about just slamming him down on the field, just because he adds a lot of additional pressure and a lot of additional power to the board because of this haste ability, allowing us to aggress on the opponent's life that much faster. So BushiAgumon, fantastic card. Next, I'm playing 2 copies of Lucemon. So Lucemon is a very powerful card to be playing with, even though we can't Digivolve into him, we can't Digivolve on top of him. We don't necessarily care about that, just because he is a big enough card to just be on his own. We also don't really care about having 10 or more cards in our trash. That's not necessarily super hard to get to, but it is not the easiest thing to do in this deck. But again, we are going to be figuring out ways to play him for free, so we don't want to see a whole lot of him, but we want to see him just enough, because his on-play ability is really what we're looking for, is just being able to recover 1. So because we are taking a whole bunch of self-inflicted damage, we do want a way to recover in case we do get into that danger area where we could potentially be in threat of dying. So Lucemon having that recover 1 that we could figure out how to play with his ability or without his ability is just very good to have. on top of him just naturally having a large body and being a very big threat to the opponent. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Patamon. So Patamon is in here for all the same reasons why Labramon's in here. He has a very similar effect, except we're gaining memory instead of drawing cards, and Patamon's abilities only once per turn. So that's just one big thing to note. But again, Patamon is just rewarding us for having our opponent's Digimon being deleted through DP reduction, and that +1 memory definitely is a really good thing because it helps put the opponent off of their memory, or it could help us, depending on how we're playing the deck, extend our plays that much further. So Patamon is overall just another very fantastic card for the deck. Next, on to the champions. I'm running 4 copies of Turuiemon. So Turuiemon is really only in here just because it has a evo cost of 1, and that's really it. Like, we don't really care about the fact that it is a card that doesn't have any abilities. It's just a very good and very efficient stepping stone. Next up, I'm running 4 copies of Growlmon. So Growlmon is a really powerful Digimon because we are really looking to use his inheritable ability, which is during your turn, while you have 3 or less security cards in your security stack, then this Digimon gains +1000 DP. Yellow before didn't really have a whole lot of ways of gaining DP on a lot of their higher level Digimon, and as a result, their higher level Digimon for the most part were a lot weaker, which is why Greymon kind of like stood above everyone else because he just literally did everything on his own. But now that we finally have more cards to help gain some extra DP, that definitely makes a lot of other cards a lot more viable just because they have the DP to live and deal potentially some extra damage. So Growlmon is just a very powerful card to have for the deck. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Pidomon. So Pidomon is very, very fantastic for the same reasons why we're running Turuiemon, where it just has a very, very low evo cost, on top of which Pidomon also has a ability of blocker, so he's also filling that blocker slot where Unimon was in it before. For the only real trade-off is just -1000 DP, which, yeah, it could matter depending on the matchup, but for the most part, just Pidomon is a really good card to have. Next, on to the ultimates, I'm running 3 copies of Sirenmon. So Sirenmon is just that value vanilla card where it has a very low cost to play for its level and a very low evo cost for its level. So this just allows us to get into our higher levels that much more efficiently. Next up, we have Angewomon. So Angewomon is probably one of the most important cards in the deck. So she has 2 really big abilities. So her first ability is a when Digivolved ability, where one of your opponent's Digimon gets security attack -2 until the end of the opponent's next turn. So this ability is pretty important because we are going to be taking a lot of self-inflicted damage, so finding any way to basically mitigate the damage that the opponent is going to be potentially dealing to you is definitely a really good thing. So her inheritable ability is a when attacking ability, where if your security has 3 or less, then you get to play 1 yellow level 3 from your hand for free. So this means that we could play BushiAgumon off of her ability, we could play Lucemon off of her ability, we could play Lopmon, we could play Kudamon. We have just so many different options to gain a whole bunch of additional value and additional benefit just from this ability, which is kind of why we're running a little bit higher on the rookie count, because we really want this ability to trigger because, again, it just applies so much extra pressure and we have so many different good targets with this ability that it's super important to get off. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Wargreymon. So Wargreymon is very powerful because he has 2 abilities of his own. His first ability, which is a main ability of Digiburst 2, is that you get to reduce one of the opponent's Digimon by 4000 DP for the turn. So you could use this to help set up some extra -DP to really take care of a lot of large threats. And then on top of which he has a nice inheritable effect, where during your turn, if you have 3 or fewer cards in your security, then this Digimon gets +1000 DP. So not only does he have potential removal ability, on top of him giving the Mega that he's Digivolving into +1000 DP, which means with Growlmon in its source also, then the Digimon can gain potentially plus 2000 DP, and that could really matter depending on the Mega that you're Digivolving into. So overall, Wargreymon is just a really powerful card to play as well. Next, on to the Megas, I'm running 3 copies of SlashAngemon. So SlashAngemon is a very powerful card because he has this nice when Digivolving ability where one of the opponent's Digimon gets up minus 8000 DP. So the minus 8000 DP is just a pretty big debuff on the opponent, on top of which if we combo it with Wargreymon, where we use Wargreymon's Digiburst ability to minus 4000 something, and then we Digivolve it into SlashAngemon to minus 8000 on top of that, then that's minus 12,000, and that can clear a whole bunch of different cards in the game. Basically almost all Megas except for like the really hyper powerful ones that start at 13 or more. So SlashAngemon just becomes an even better card because of Wargreymon, or just in general, just because of its minus DP being very powerful. Even though he does lack in the DP department himself, that's kind of why we play cards like Wargreymon, is to help alleviate the fact that the DP needs to be a little bit higher in order for them to have a little bit better survivability. But overall, SlashAngemon is just another very fantastic card for the deck, especially at minusing the opponent's DP to trigger some of our other effects like Patamon or Labramon. Next, I'm running 1 copy of Magnadramon. So Magnadramon is a very powerful Digimon because she has a nice when played ability where if our security is 3 or less, then we get to recover 2. So she's kind of like the emergency button where if we really need to start healing, then Magnadramon just heals us for a lot. On top of which, Magnadramon has a very powerful when attacking skill where we get to play 1 level 3 yellow Digimon from our hand without paying its cost. So similar to why we're running Angewomon is why we want to see Magnadramon, where we just start attacking with Magnadramon. So again, we could play Lucemon, we could play BushiAgumon, we could play Kudamon, we could play Lopmon. We just have so many good targets that this ability is really important, and that's kind of why we're running Magnadramon in the deck. Next, we're running probably the main Mega of the deck, which is going to be Wargreymon. So this version of Wargreymon is yellow, obviously, but he is really powerful because he has a really nice when attacking ability, where once per turn, by adding the top card of our security to our hand, we get to unsuspend this Digimon, and then one of the opponent's Digimon gets minus 6000 DP. So again, we could use this with like setting up Wargreymon to use Digiburst, minus 4000, Digivolve into Wargreymon, swing, use his ability, stand him up, then minus another 6000. Just all of these DP reductions can start stacking to make it very hard for the opponent to just like have their Digimon be able to live. So he's just really good for that, on top of which the card in our security stack is going into our hand. So again, kind of just benefiting the fact that we're reducing our own security, on top of which it's adding it to our hand, so that way we get even more card advantage, similar reason why we're playing Lopmon. And then, again, the minus 6000 DP and restand are 2 very good effects because we could trigger multiple instances of our on-attack skills. So paired up with Angewomon, we could get 2 instances of this when attacking skill to basically try to play like 2 BushiAgumon, and that's like 4 attacks right there. So like, this card just allows us to add so much additional pressure onto the opponent because removal on top of stacking a couple of on-attack skills just is very powerful, on top of him being able to multi-attack. So this is the reason why we kind of want these DP buff cards, is just because we want to try to make sure that Wargreymon survives security checks. So that's just one big thing to note, but regardless, Wargreymon is just a very powerful card for the deck overall. And then the last Mega of the deck is going to be Chaosman Vulture Arm. So Chaosman Vulture Arm is just a really good card for the deck because he has a very powerful when Digivolving ability where we get to trigger the ability twice, and the ability is that we get to have one of our opponent's Digimon get minus 7000 DP for the turn. So again, with all of our different DP reduction abilities stacking, we could use this to clear some relatively large Digimon, or we could use this in separate instances to reduce multiple of the opponent's Digimon down. So this ability just has a whole bunch of utility to it. on how we could potentially use it, and that's just a very, very powerful thing to have. On top of which, he has some relatively large stats himself, and he has even more benefit by having an on-deletion ability, where we gain 3 memory when he's deleted. So if it's on the opponent's turn, it's potentially taking away 3 memory. If it's on our turn, it's gaining us 3 memory, so that way we could basically continue and extend some of our plays. Chaosmon is just a very, very good card to have. The best target for Chaosmon is actually SlashAngemon, because we could just Digivolve into SlashAngemon, minus 8,000, then we could, if we have the memory, Digivolve into Chaosman Vulture Arm, and then minus 7,000 something, and then 7,000, the thing that hit the 8,000. So it just adds a whole bunch of different abilities to just remove a whole bunch of potential threats that the opponent has. And on top of which, he's just a relatively beefy body himself. And then the last card of the deck is going to be the only option card we're running in the deck, and that is going to be Blinding Light. So Blinding Light is a 0-cost yellow option card where its main ability is trashing the top of our security to gain 2 memory. So again, this is a really good card for setting up our security to be 3 or less to trigger a whole bunch of our abilities, and then on top of which the upside to doing that is gaining 2 memory. 2 memory is quite a lot to gain, so it definitely allows us to extend a lot of our plays potentially. The only downside to the card is it doesn't really have a security effect, but that's why we're only running 3 copies of it, because sometimes you just don't want to see it into the security, and having 3 just kind of ensures that it'll have a less chance of doing that while still being able to be seen in our main deck, especially since we have a whole bunch of different ways of drawing cards. So Blinding Light is one of the best option cards we could ever hope for the deck. And as far as the reason why we're not running a whole bunch of other options or tamer cards is just because our Digimon are really, really efficient, and we really just want to play our Digimon, and we don't really want to take the time to set up a tamer, so we don't really want to lose a whole bunch of tempo just setting up the tamer. So in terms of other cards we could run in the deck, we could run Tokomon as another potential Digimon for the Digitama. So Tokomon has a really nice ability where once per turn, if your opponent's Digimon was deleted by having its DP reduced to 0, then the Digimon gains plus 1,000 DP. So this is just another way we could potentially gain some extra DP, and it's not really hard to trigger the effect, because we just have so many cards that just can reduce the opponent's DP, and we have so many large instances of DP reduction that it's more or less going to be going off. So Tokomon is just another really good Digitama that you could think about using. If you want, you could think about using Gatomon. So Gatomon is a pretty solid Digimon because of her own inheritable ability of when attacking one of the opponent's Digimon gets minus 1,000 DP. So if you don't necessarily want to go with the whole buffing your DP strat, then you could continue on the dealing debuffs on the opponent's DP strat, and then this is just a very powerful card to just go with that, because, you know, it's just an on-attack skill, paired that up with Wargreymon, and we could get 2 instances of it, and it's just a really powerful card to just reduce the opponent's DP. You could also play Salmon that has the same ability, but I just feel like our rookie slot is really, really tight, and our champion slot we have a little bit more flexibility and leeway for. Next up, you could play Unimon. So Unimon is still just another blocker. We have Kudamon to already be our blocker, but if you just want to have more blockers in the deck, the fact that yellow has both Unimon and Kudamon now is definitely a really, really powerful thing, just because, again, more blockers means we could potentially stave off more damage off of the opponent. So if you want to go a little bit less on the DP boosting, then you could substitute out some Growlmons for some Unimons just to have some more blockers in. But Unimon, just being a blocker, is really, really good to think about having extra copies of in the deck. You could also think about running Angewomon. Angewomon is just a pretty solid Digimon just because she allows us to recover, and she kind of is just acting as that buffer where it's just like, okay, we deal a whole bunch of damage to ourselves, Digivolve up into Angewomon, then we could start healing ourselves a little bit more. So Angewomon is really only good just for this healing ability, and she doesn't really do anything else for the deck other than just be that healer. So if you want to mess around with the deck's ratios a little bit, you could figure out a way to squeeze her in for that healing, but I just don't really think that she's super necessary, but she's definitely a very good card to think about for the deck nonetheless. Then you could also think about running Mastimon. So Mastimon is just another very, very powerful Mega that does have a lot of synergy with the deck. So her When Digivolve ability is just really, really powerful, where we discard the top card of our security and our opponent's security. So she's kind of acting as a little bit of burn to help aggress on the opponent, on top of getting us to that 3 threshold that we want to be at or maintain that 3 threshold. And then the other part of the ability is that we get to play a level 4 or less yellow or purple Digimon from our trash for free. So if we have Lucimon in our trash, or if we have BushiAgumon in our trash, those are 2 very, very powerful targets that we can just pull out, and then BushiAgumon can swing right away because of haste, and Lucimon allows us to heal because of his on-play ability. So Mastimon is just a very powerful card that you could think about using with the deck as well. You could also think about using Churubimon in the deck, because Churubimon has a really powerful when attacking ability, where if your security is 3 or less, then you get to place 1 yellow Digimon from your trash on top of your security. So if you're really in fear of just having your security be very, very low, then Churubimon is definitely a great card to act as another buffer. Because we are still playing with a whole bunch of on-attack skills, it's not necessarily like we're not going to want to attack with the card, on top of which he is healing us a little bit because he's putting a card from our trash into our security. Yes, it's a Digimon, but that's kind of why the deck already runs a whole bunch of Digimon and a lot less of everything else. So there's definitely a lot of wiggle room in terms of some different cards that you could play with, and I definitely think Churubimon is a very, very interesting card to play with. You could also think about running Clavis Angelmon. So Clavis Angelmon is another Digimon with an on-attack skill that synergizes with having 3 or less security, and then it's just minus 6,000 on the opponent's DP. So this is kind of filling that similar role to what Wargreymon is doing. It's just Wargreymon is better, but if you want to run Clavis Angelmon in complements to Wargreymon, then again, their abilities just stacking in terms of DP reduction could just lead to you being able to deal with some very, very powerful things that could be on the opponent's field. So Clavis Angelmon is just a pretty solid Digimon that you could also think about running. If you really want to run an additional option, I definitely think that Seventh Heavens is a very, very powerful option that you could be thinking about running, just because it's a very large DP reduction. So we already have a whole bunch of smaller DP reductions, so we could use that in combination with this card to just still deal with a whole bunch of very large bodies. And on top of which, this card does have the security effect of activating its main effect, so whether it's in the hand or the security, you'll still be able to get the card's ability off. And again, it's just a very, very powerful ability to just reduce the opponent's Digimon's DP by a lot. It doesn't necessarily clear out a whole bunch of megas, but it does clear out basically almost everything that isn't a mega. So it's, again, still just a very powerful option card. And then if you want to run some tamers in the deck, you could run TK, because TK is just insane, because looking at your security and then picking a card from it and then adding it to your hand is just very, very powerful. It just is more consistency because it's allowing you to basically have access to a whole bunch of different cards. So you could use this in combination with a whole bunch of other cards to just get some really powerful interactions. Like you could use this with Churubimon to basically just set up Churubimon to attack, put a Digimon from your trash into your security, then play TK to then grab that card back, and then you'll get to recover 1, and then your security is shuffled. So like he just has a whole bunch of really powerful interactions with the deck, on top of which he's also a memory fixer, and that could be pretty decent to have sometimes. And then you could also think about running Taikamiya, or inversely Hikari. So Hikari is just if you have 3 or less security, you gain 1 memory. I don't feel like that's really super spicy or special, especially when Taikamiya is kind of doing the same thing, but just a little bit more, where during your turn, if you have 3 or less security, then all of your Digimon get a plus 1000 DP boost, which I definitely feel like is way better than anything Hikari is doing. On top of which, he also has another ability where during your turn, if an opponent's Digimon is deleted by having its DP be reduced to 0, then you could suspend this tamer and get 1 memory. So like between this and Hikari, if you're just going to be gaining a memory, I definitely think Taikamiya has a lot more upside, especially for this style of deck. Even though they both are very, very good, I just feel like you don't really want to run a whole bunch of tamers in this style of deck just because your Digimon are very, very impactful. So for the most part, this is just the deck. It's kind of like an aggro control style of deck where like you're still going to be attacking the opponent a lot because that's how you trigger a whole bunch of your abilities off. And then you just have a really solid low end, you have a really solid middle end, you have a really solid high end that just has the ability to deal with a whole bunch of potential threats that the opponent has to deal with. On top of which, you're just having a whole bunch of very, very powerful cards do a lot of very, very powerful synergies with one another. And it is definitely a really, really interesting deck to play. And it's definitely a really, really powerful deck to look out for. So huge shout out to the Digimon TCG Discord for helping me like finish building this deck. And it's definitely a really interesting deck to play nonetheless. And if you like this content and want to help support the channel, I do have a TCG Player affiliate link down in the description below. If you use that link to purchase anything off of tcgplayer.com, then some of the money will end up going to supporting me in the channel. Then I have also partnered up with Overcard Gamers on Facebook, and they are nice enough to print some of my playmat designs. I will have more playmat designs going up in the future, so feel free to check back on them and some of my designs. And then whenever you mention my YouTube channel to them, they will give a $2 discount off of any of the playmats with my designs on them. And as always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next video.